I am seeing basically everything in my inbox is AI these days, and it's recently been flooded by big social platforms that are bringing in AI to reduce, reimagine, and simplify the creative process with, giants like Meta, TikTok, YouTube. So you guys are both startup founders, with little guys like Go Charlie and Trumpo, and everyone's trying to do the same thing with AI. Who's going to win? Talk about how that will play out.
It's a great question. I think for a startup playing amongst these behemoths, you have to be really honed in on what it is you want to do, what it is you want to enable. When we first started out, our first mantra was like enable anyone to be a creator. If you look at all the youth in college, high school, middle school, even now, the number one job is they want to be a YouTube creator. They don't want to work the jobs of previous generations. They want to fundamentally rethink how they live their lives. And so our tool was always focused on enabling you to be that version of yourself. And I think that's still true to the mentality that we have here. So the big platforms will always create. But I think they're always going to be viewed in this standpoint of it's always just trying to aid their business. And I think the startups that are successful in this wave of AI are the ones that are truly focused on having a special relationship with their customer and being laser focused on enabling their customer to be who they want to be as a result of AI, not replacing their customer with AI. So that's the way that we've tried to approach it. We get a lot more technical about moats and all those types of things, but I think long term it's all going to be about how does this enable you to be the version of yourself that you want to be.
I agree.
Amazing. So, Brennan, you recently raised, what was it? It was $2 million, right?
Yeah.
Pre-seed fund for Go Charlie AI. You were previously in the investor seat as an investor at the SoftBank Vision Fund. Talk about raising that money. What was that like?
So for those of you that aren't familiar with the Vision Fund, I think most people are, but it was a $100 billion venture fund. So I think the first lesson I had to learn was that just warps your mind. When you become a startup founder and you try to go from 0 to 1, it's a whole different process. You have to celebrate small wins, the first customer, the 5th customer, the 10th customer, the first $100, the second $1,000. So to be quite frank, I thought it was going to be a lot easier. You see hundreds of millions of dollars going out the door every day. You think, oh, $2 million is going to be easy. It was anything but. And I think raising money, especially in an industry where it seems like there's big dollars being thrown around, it often just comes to repeat founders or people that had celebrity relationships, and to really make a wave, this kind of goes back to that playing amongst behemoths, is difficult. And so I felt like we were subjected to just all sorts of scrutiny that would be even a lot for a Series A club. But I think it forces you to rise to the occasion. So if anyone in here is trying to fundraise, my biggest lesson is really hone in the story and expect it to take longer than you think it might, because there's a lot of investors that took it back in recent years, especially my former employer. So.
And I mean, it's interesting because from where I sit, it looks like everyone is trying to, people are not getting a lot of funding these days except for AI companies. And all the AI companies are doing similar things to some extent. So how do you differentiate yourself to attract that kind of funding?
At first, it's kind of funny. When we first started out, our whole goal was to just build AI models. We wanted to build AI models for companies. We felt every company, every business, every person was going to have their own AI model. And I still believe in that vision long term. But investors had no idea what AI models were. They didn't know what large language models were. And the second ChatGPT took off, every investor was like, oh yeah, now we're AI investors, which is kind of a fun turn of phase. So for us, differentiation is focusing on the niche. So we build smaller models that are more effective in specific use cases like creating content for marketing, creating content for SEO, creating content for social media, and enabling you to tell your message across a bunch of different platforms. So for us, it's a differentiation through technology, but also the workflows that we're focused on. I think that's really where AI startups start to make themselves differentiable, is what workflows are they enabling to be faster, and how much more of the workflow do you trust them to take over?
Okay, so speaking of workflows or work stoppages, The writers just ended a 148-day strike. Adam, writers, including this one, have been particularly nervous and upset about AI. And you actually are a writer who started an AI company. So tell me a little bit about how you get people, tell me a little bit more about your company and how you're moving the Hollywood population to use your technology.
Sure. Well, the company that I started is called Trumbo. It's basically an attempt to speed up the Hollywood development process. So every place in Hollywood, whether it's an agency, a studio, production company, they rely on something called coverage, which is basically a little quick report on a script that's often written by an underpaid assistant or an intern, and it's really just a tedious process. So I'm building a platform to read scripts and just pump out these reports so people don't have to waste their time doing it. But obviously, like Alexandra alluded to, there's a lot of issues in terms of just getting people in the industry to trust AI, trust this process. A lot of people warn me not to do it because they're afraid that I'm secretly going to be training my own LLM on their scripts and trying to take their jobs, which obviously as a writer I'm not interested in doing, and have built certain facets into the platform itself to make sure that doesn't happen. But yeah, it's tough to get people who just went through a huge strike, against AI and at least part of it, to trust that you're not gonna screw them over one way or another using AI.
So I'm curious, when you started this journey, did you think that trust was going to be part of the sales pitch?
Yeah, I think I always knew, because writers in Hollywood are, for lack of a better term, Luddites, and they, are afraid of change and afraid of embracing change. So I think that's been my biggest challenge, and will continue to be my biggest challenge when trying to sell people on it and getting them to sign up and subscribe and everything. Like, I really have to kind of sell myself as a writer who doesn't want to see the future where scripts are wholly written by AI.
Yeah, it feels like this is the first software I've seen where I think we got woken up with everything that happened with Meta and some of the other social media platforms and just how much data was there. But trust was something that I never really thought would come into a software sales pitch. But increasingly with AI, it seems like that seems to be the case.
Yeah, I mean, I was hoping that people would just be like, yeah, this is a no-brainer, we're going to do it. Like, the idea is good, but the problem is just everybody's fear. And I kind of had to put things on hold during the strike because I didn't know how everything was going to shake out, just in terms of the terms of the deal, and if I could even do something like this that was in line with what the WGA wanted. And it's still kind of a gray area, honestly, so I'm proceeding with caution.
Yeah, I think that trust is obviously an enormous issue with AI, and you look at what's happening now in the Middle East, and just the incredible amount of misinformation and biased information out there. You have to imagine that in a world with a lot of AI, there's going to be even more of that. Talk about that.
I mean, from a writing standpoint, which is really all I'm qualified to talk about,
that's good enough.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, the big fear with the WGA and the strike was that AI would take our jobs and write scripts, and there would be no need for humans. But luckily, the AI won. The WGA won what they were hoping to win in regards to that. So I think for now, there's like a sigh of relief amongst writers, and they're not too worried about the AI at this moment. I do worry that they're being a little complacent, because I think we can all agree that as time moves on, the technology is going to improve greatly, and it's going to be more and more embedded in our daily lives, our creative lives, our work lives. And down the line, it's going to be harder and harder to push back against AI. This agreement only lasts 3 years, so every 3 years it's going to be a new fight. And sure, this does set a new precedent, which is helpful for the writers, but I think ultimately they're going to have to learn to trust AI a little more because it's going to be hard to stem that tide as time moves on.
Yeah, I think misinformation is a problem that I feel like as a society we've become increasingly aware of, which excites me. I don't know that we're much closer to a true answer to it because when you get down to misinformation, often it feels like people are, is this factual, is this not factual, is this really happening, is this someone's interpretation? And that's so hard to solve. For us, we've tried to approach our platform from having web capabilities built in to cross-verify with the model's output. So the model has its own knowledge base, it verifies against what it's seeing on the web. But I think everyone in this room can agree, everything that you see on the internet is not always true. That's the whole misinformation system. So I think it's a hard problem to solve. The best that you can do is try to cross-validate in the early days. But then you see tools like community notes on Twitter. You see some of these other solutions coming up where they have factual content and making sure that that's part of the training data set. I think with the current iteration of AI, very hard to solve misinformation. You're still going to very much have to have human in the loop. But I do think there are a couple evolutions from now that have more factual information. That's not going to stop you from, is this bias? Is this someone's perspective or is this actual fact? I think that's a larger societal issue that we need to have a conversation about.
Does anyone in the audience have any questions for our panelists today? Yeah.
I was just wondering about what you think in terms of how, if AI is used more in writing, how that will impact diversity in like the stories that we tell, because these data sets have been proven to be biased. So how will that impact projects like yours in terms of ensuring that diversity is maintained and still continues to increase as we've been trying to do?
It's a great question.
That's a good question. Well, I generally have an issue with the censorship and the bias that are already baked into ChatGPT or Midjourney or any of these tools. So, I guess the answer to your question is still empower a diverse set of people to be writers. I mean, the good thing about the deal that the WGA just made, it was basically stated that an AI can't be the sole creator of any work, so there's still got to be a human at the helm regardless. But in terms of the bias with these tools, yeah, I mean, I don't know if this can actually happen, but I would love for some of that bias to be taken out if that were possible, because I feel like that's limiting the scope of what the AI could be used for in an artistic sense. I don't want my art to be dictated by the morals or biases of, no offense, like 10 people, honestly. I want it to be, art has to be offensive and subversive and transgressive to be impactful, in my opinion, and you need a wide swath of opinion to be able to get to a place like that.
Completely agree. I'm curious, Alex, have you in your work seen anyone doing interesting work in that particular space, making sure that there's more diverse data sets and there's more diverse outputs? I have some viewpoints here, but I'm curious if anything's going on.
In my work, no. I think that like in newsrooms, and I'm not in charge of any newsroom, I just write my stories, but in newsrooms they try and hire diverse people, so there are diverse voices that are represented in our stories. Of course, there are a great deal of challenges with that, but yeah, it's not necessarily, it's not an LLM. Anyone else have questions?
Maybe to add on to these two answers. So I think it's a great question. I think there's the companies that are thinking about the right way of making that very much a part of the training data discussion. And I've seen a couple startups that are focused on purely creating data sets that have diverse perspectives, diverse language, diverse visuals. I think that's a great way to start with it. My hope is that at the same time that it is creating the bias issue and the lack of diversity issue, there's also an enablement of a population that previously would not create, now that they have these tools. If I think about pretty much any large-scale endeavor that I've ever attempted to do on my own in my life, usually I run out of motivation because it's just me. And now that I have AI, I've started to do all sorts of things that I wouldn't have normally done. I I've seen people that
Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, so like, I'm gonna try not to tear up, but like, two of my proudest moments with this startup so far have been one customer where we literally saved them $1,400 a month with one single feature that we released. And
What was that?
it was being able to transcribe their YouTube videos so that they could tell their story on other platforms that they wanted to grow on, which was, I didn't think that would be the feature that did that, but it was really amazing. Another was when we introduced language capabilities, so they could now tell the stories that they wrote in English to their family back home in their language, because that wasn't their native tongue. But then the third one was, I got on a call with someone that I've been emailing with for a while, and they said, I am dyslexic, and this is the first time I've ever been able to have the confidence to share my writing, because your tool has enabled me to take my ideas and turn them into something that I felt comfortable about. And since then, they've started creating more, they've created their own brands, and so I think part of the diverse perspective, the diverse output, diverse perspectives being present in these AI models is more people being part of the conversation. I think AI is enabling that, which is what gets me really excited. Will that work long term? I think remains to be seen, but that's my.
Thank you.
And if I could piggyback on that, I think AI will allow for more accessibility in terms of filmmaking. Right now, making a movie is hard. It costs a lot of money. You need to know the right people. You have to get cast and crew and equipment together. But I think in the not too distant future, you're going to be able to make a full movie at home on your laptop using only AI tools. I've already made little trailers just with what's available right now. So I think that will allow for more of a democratization of making cinema.
I want to go back to what you were saying, Brennan, about seeing these things that you didn't expect from Go Charlie. Like, to push back, like, don't you think that that's kind of part of the problem with AI? Is that you're seeing applications that you didn't necessarily think were going to happen, and obviously in these examples, that's amazing stuff you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's not always the case.
Yeah, I almost commented this when you were talking about like the filters. So I will say that operating this company has changed my perspective on humanity, both from what is the average intelligence, let's say, of someone that's using our tool, but two, how quickly people are willing to use these tools for nefarious purposes. Like, I would say early days when we first released image generation, if we wouldn't have had content filters, there would have been some very bad dog images that Charlie generated. I like to think that everybody should be enabled to create the things that they want to, but I definitely think that there's lines that shouldn't be crossed with it. But my hope is that it does more good than bad. I think there was a passage I was reading in Rick Rubin's book about a creative way of being. I think that's the name I might be butchering, but that's his most recent book. And it talks about AlphaGo, which basically beat the Go Master. Go is a board game for those that don't know, in a game. And the AI made a move that no human would have made. Humans would have thought of two different moves, and the AI made a third move. Grandmaster walks off and never plays the game again. And so I do think that there is some nefarious people, there are bad actors, but I do think that type of story shows you that AI can help us make moves and go places that we've never gone before. And so my hope is that the good outweighs the bad, but I am not going to sit here and say that there won't be bad consequences.
I mean, to add to that, I will say that even when I've used ChatGPT, for example, when I've been stuck on a script or an outline, like it's not perfect, it obviously doesn't have the nuance or complexity of a human writer, but every time I put something in, it'll give me something I didn't have before, and often take my story in a new direction. So yeah, sure, while there are negatives, I hope that the positives outweigh the negatives and can open up new types of narratives, or at least just help people with whatever they're struggling with creatively.
I'm curious, like, when you use AI to assist you, so there's this interesting phenomenon I've had where if I just use the AI to create everything and I'm just like publish it, I don't have the same sense of achievement if I like do 75-80% of the work and I'm having the AI fill it.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that is kind of the same?
Yeah, I mean, look, I would never use AI to write an entire project. First of all, it's not, at least where it is right now, it's not good enough to do that. It's too superficial, it's too non-specific, it's too big. But yeah, it's helpful when I have half of an outline. I'm like, how do I get from point A to point B? And it gives me a little something like, I don't know if I feel a sense of achievement if I were to get there on my own, but at the end of the day, if I get there, and I don't really care how I get there as long as,
Yeah. Does anyone else in the audience have a question? Yeah.
This is super interesting. Thank you guys. I worry a little bit about our youth. That 3 kids, and right around the corner is high school, and they can use AI for writing essays. And I fear that some of the ritual of coming up and doing some of the more repetitive tasks where you truly learn to master certain crafts, especially the creative space, and learning from masters and copying and things like that. Curious, I'm guessing you were an apprentice of writing, and you of finance. Well, if I'm I have a kid coming out of college right now, how is their life going to be different, especially in the creative space? How would you guide them?
I mean, I have no idea. That's a good question. No, I mean, I think, yes, obviously that's a concern because people learn by being apprentices, they learn by experience more than anything else. I guess my hope is that you can bypass some of the mundane steps that you would have to do, and I'm sure there's stuff to be learned by doing that, but maybe they can advance faster and quicker into heights that we can't even conceive of yet because they don't have to waste time with the things that AI can automate for themselves.
It's a question I think about a lot, actually. So I have 2 nephews, one's 4, one's 7, and then I have a niece who just started college, and I've actually encouraged her to go AI, like that's where it's all going. I went to Indiana, she's going to Indiana, so I'm like, yeah, Mark Cuban, sure, Indiana, I use stuff. But she wants to go in film. And
You should tell her not to do that.
I thought we might say that. And I think I try to think about it like, how did my life feel like before I had an iPhone? How did my life feel like before I had search? How did my life feel like before I had Instagram taking up 3 hours of my day because I'm trying to create content for my business? And the answer is like, I don't know what my life would have looked like otherwise. I don't think I have a right answer, but I think it's going to be a much more evolved relationship with technology, where technology is going to learn us. It's going to feel like a second skin. It's going to feel like an extension of us. That's kind of what I get with it. I don't think we're going to learn as much kind of core competencies. Like I think the core competencies go away. But I'll leave you with my hope. Is that I think too much of education was relying on research papers and like writing papers of certain lengths. And me personally, and I know this doesn't fit well with many students, but I think the confidence in establishing the confidence for people to be up in front of people, to be able to express their ideas in concise manners, is much more useful to me than can I cite the right sources, can I write a 30-page research paper about this topic. So my hope is that educational, and even AI is enabling this now, becomes more immersive, becomes more active, rather than I'm just writing a paper in the background and turning this in and hope I get it.
Yeah, John, that's a great question, and I was actually planning to ask something similar, so I'm gonna add my question as well. Brennan, I noticed on GoCharlie.ai that you guys are explicitly targeting students. Talk a bit more about your uptake with that population. And it does seem like you're sort of saying the quiet part out loud with going up against OpenAI. So talk about that.
Yeah. So I think students is a great population to try to target with AI. I don't sit here and pretend that they're going to be our paying customer base long term. For us, we have a free program they can utilize. We actually have an educators program where we give teachers and their students a tool for free. We've done that for Columbia, NYU, a couple other universities. I think part of being a founder at an AI startup, it feels like my responsibility is to make sure that students are learning as quickly as possible how to use this technology so that they are at a competitive advantage coming out of school. So who knows what that's going to look like That being said, I think there's a lot of startups that literally are writing research papers for students. So I think you need to learn how to use this technology, and if you learn how to use it just to write research papers, I think that's an acceptable evil. I mean, people have now even been changing their curriculum as a result of ChatGPT. So I think there's a lot of change happening as a result of it, but our hope is that students use it to make their lives better. That's ultimately what we're trying to do.
Right. So switching gears here, there's a new study by Mercury, our sponsor here, that found that 80% of startup founders used AI in their creative initiatives. How do you think this will reverberate through tech and creative industries? Adam, you want to take that?
So, basically you're just asking how does the use of AI...
TLDR, founders are really using AI. How is
Okay, I
that
can
going to
do that.
reverberate through tech and
I can
creative
talk about more
industries?
from the creative side of things. I think this is one of my big fears with AI is just kind of a flattening of art, and I'm sure there are similar effects when you're talking about starting a company. Maybe we'll get there eventually, but right now, and I don't really see this happening even long term, that the AI can't match the complexity, the messiness, the uniqueness of a human creative. And even if it's going to get close and can replicate it and can fool some people, there's going to be something lost there. And I think ultimately the art is going to suffer for it. So I hope that people, while it's a useful tool, don't rely on it too much and can kind of still have their, guiding artistic hand there.
So as a startup founder that builds AI and uses AI every day, I think it's great that they're adapting. I've been somewhat disappointed that the majority of AI startups that have had success are the ones focusing on enterprise, because to me, the true valiant opportunity is to enable startup founders, enable David to have a better Shopify client, to make these startup founders superhuman, people that are willing to take these risks and put it all on the line. I think that those are the more admirable people to try to support rather than the giant enterprises. So it doesn't surprise me, those figures don't surprise me, but what I think it reverberates into is the service providers. The agencies start to get replaced by AI solutions more often than not. I think it also makes them kind of look at what are the services that they're providing and what's the value they're actually delivering. Because first time I contracted a marketing agency, half their fee was management. It's like, I can manage the tool, I need you to create things and do things that I wouldn't be able to do. So I think it reverberates through the service providers first. On the creative front, we talked about this a little bit on the prep call, but I think creativity is this misunderstood thing where people just think that creativity happens. It's just this thing that some people are starting to bolt of lightning and it happens. Very rarely in life has that happened to me, if ever. Creativity is a skill that you develop over time, and it's something that you create space for. And so my hope is that the AI reverberation for creative space is it takes away the work that you don't want to do so that you have less noise and ultimately have more time to create. But I'm curious, has that been your experience using AI?
Well, in some cases, I think it's similar. It's been helpful. The hardest part about writing is sitting down in front of the blank page and trying to figure out what to write, or maybe you have too many ideas and you can't choose which path to go down. So it's helpful to have something like ChatGPT where it can kind of be your little writing partner and take some of the pressure off, and at least you're not starting from zero. You can have something to go off of and move forward from, and that just speeds up the process too, generally.
I do have a worry about a different way that this technology could reverberate. And it kind of goes back to your question. Fame during this period of time, or coverage as a creative. I think if you are a famous creator throughout history, now your information is being used to train these big models, and so you will be relevant. But how does a small guy that's not famous now become famous in a more increasingly populated world with all this data from historical people? Does that mean that it's easier to be famous and everybody wants to be famous, so they show up in these training data sets? I think that's an undiscussed kind of reverberation that could happen in creative fields. Less focus on up and coming and emerging talent, more focus on these people that have been popular forever.
Yeah, I mean, especially if, as we kind of know it has been, these LLMs are trained on the art of, you know, all different types of artists, and there's a couple lawsuits going on right now about that. So I guess it depends how those lawsuits shake out ultimately. But you know, I think ultimately it's going to come down to who finds a way to leverage the technology for their own uses. You know, at the end of the day, if you're making something with an AI that is very, very similar to someone else's art, sure, it might help that other person in the long run, but it also might push you to have to be more unique and original to stand out, and maybe we get someone who's even better than we could have been battling before.
Yeah, I'm gonna make the not so controversial argument that I think there's always room in society for attractive people who can dance, sing, and act. But I want to go to another thing here, which is this idea that maybe the LLMs are gonna take over and destroy humanity. So next month, world leaders will convene in the UK to address the catastrophic harms that could be done by AI to launch cyber attacks and create bioweapons, including increasing their own influence, aka this horrible sci-fi future that I just described. And we're, you know, in the middle of two wars. Where do you guys come down on this and like AI for warfare? Big question.
Okay, I'm not the person to talk about. But I understand the existential threats and the fears there. I guess if I can draw an analog back to the creativity stuff, I'm not so afraid of it being, you know, taking everyone's jobs and mimicking humans and really replacing all of us and killing us all, Terminator style. I think, well, obviously that's a possibility. I just don't see it as even having the sentience enough to be able to do that, and I'm hopeful, crossing my fingers, that it's never going to truly get to that place where it's, you know, Ex Machina.
Really, really hard finger crossing.
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
It's not.
It's a tough conversation. I think one way or another, any technology will be used for warfare if it gives an advantage to some opponent. That's not me saying that we would ever enable that. We're focused on much different use cases. But if I've learned anything, most of the technology breakthroughs that have happened in recent memory have been a result of military research that ultimately then became a public use technology. So I do have concern with it being used for that. I think my concern is more about like the mind control potential that it has for large scale populations.
Okay, so tell us more about
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So like, I'm not saying that the AI will really live in your mind, although Neuralink is a whole separate discussion. But more so like propaganda is a big thing. I think one of the blessings of COVID, which I know COVID was really bad, but it like woke people up to the amount of propaganda that's out there. And so I think AI could be a propaganda machine in the wrong hands. And so anytime you have these military conflicts, whoever has the most power, the most money to like ultimately utilize that and distribute that propaganda that they want to may be able to do so. I think there's some checks and balances being put in, but those always move a little bit behind the technology. But yeah, I can't really speak to our AI being used for warfare.
Yeah.
But I don't think that the LLMs, just for everybody, LLMs are not sentient. They're not, plain and simple. They're very good stochastic parrots. They're pattern recognition machines. There is more advanced tech that will come in the future, but I still have a hard time believing that large language models will ever get to that size. They'll be very good at like feeling like they can speak to you, but they're not just going to go off the rails and start like wars.
That's very reassuring. A propaganda machine in the wrong hands, like what is that?
Yeah, so many people don't actually know this, and even fewer read OpenAI's terms. So we used OpenAI in our early days to like stand up MVPs and play around. And they were very clear about the three things that they didn't do. So one was cannabis, two was like violent and not safe for work content. and the third was political. And I very quickly realized that the reason that they shut off political is for that very reason that we just talked about. They don't want someone creating in-mass content trying to sway a large swath of the population using OpenAI. I think it's admirable. I think they've actually backtracked on that because now politicians are using OpenAI for those types of very things, but not at the scale that they might. But that's more what I'm thinking about. It's like, what if you had a chatbot that was a candidate and they ultimately were in every single platform 24/7 and felt very accessible? That would be an advantage over someone that's less capitalized, can't afford that technology, and ultimately is not as accessible all the time.
I think that was an episode of Black Mirror, actually. Yeah.
I feel like the phrase, I think this was an episode of Black Mirror, has come up more in the last couple of months than ever before, for sure. Questions in the black?
I feel like everyone has kind of talked a little bit about the AI of today versus the AI of the future. And if you look at like major cultural and technological changes in the past, what tends to happen in society overestimates the impact in the near term and underestimates the impact in the long term. So I'm curious, like, what you think, like, where is our current view and perspectives like misaligned with where you, like, the pace at which AI will evolve?
It's an amazing question.
You still have one from Bill Gates? It's a good one. I do think that we've overreacted to the current state, but I think that's likely a byproduct of underreacting to some other huge technological shifts in the past. So I'm happy that we are having a conversation. So we are building something called a metacognitive agent. And for those of you that don't know what that is, and most don't, I barely do, but basically metacognitive means knowledge of self. So cognitive means that we're giving cognition, reasoning capabilities. Metacognition means that it understands self and will improve itself over time. Combine that with the stochastic nature of a large language model, you effectively have an AI teammate that can go and do things on your behalf and continue to learn with you. In the wrong hands, that could be very bad. In the right hands, that could be an enabler of a society that I think is beyond imagination. So I think slight overreaction now, but I think the right reaction for the long-term capabilities of this tech.
And I mean, in terms of Hollywood and the creative side of things, I would say that while I think it was necessary for the WGA to make a big deal about it and protect themselves right now at this inflection point, I think some of those fears are probably overblown in terms of the capabilities of the AI to be able to take our jobs and write full scripts. And also, you know, I don't even know if people would want to go out and see that. You know, I don't want to see a movie that's written by AI. I'm sure at some point it might get so close that you won't be able to tell, but I want to see movies that are by humans, about humans, and if it's made by an AI, like, is it even art, really? Like, you know, it doesn't interest me.
Can random side tangent here, but I'm curious, given like the conclusion here, do you think that if AI were allowed to write scripts in the agreement, do you think that it would result in us having more box office variety?
Ooh, I don't know. Maybe. Well, I'll take it a different way. I do think that AI moving forward in the future will give us more box office variety. You know, the biggest problem right now to having interesting, challenging movies made is money. You know, it costs an incredible amount of money to make a movie, and also to market a movie. So essentially, a general rule of thumb is, let's say it costs $100 million to make a movie, it costs the same amount to market a movie. So from the get-go, that's $200 million that you're in the hole at our fictional studio. So you need to make a movie that then somehow makes $500 million to $1 billion in order to justify its existence. And so that leads you to having big, dumb action movies that are based on IP, that are very specific, that can travel well overseas. So my hope is that as AI comes in and reduces the costs of production and post-production, we can have some more risk and more experimentation, and there's less pressure on any movie to have to be, you know, Spider-Man or Avatar or whatever it is.
Do Do you think AI can help George R. R. Martin finish Game of Thrones?
Well, he's suing OpenAI, so probably not. Yeah.
There's a question over here.
So just kind of switching gears to the creative side of this. Obviously the rate at which we're generating content with AI is like exponential to it. And already there's so much clutter, right? A lot of content, a lot of things, a lot of, it's very difficult for you to become famous or attract people's attention. How do you think, I'm curious, how do you think that's gonna change as there is even more clutter? And this being like fake news on one side of the spectrum, and then the other is, as a creative, how do you kind of become different into whatever's out there?
Great question.
It's a good question. I think my hope is that, well, I'll give it 2 cents. My fear is that all of this AI stuff is going to cause like a devaluation of the art form. People are going to be able to make their own movies in their own homes. There's going to be a flood of probably pretty crappy, mediocre stuff, and we're going to have to wade through all that to get to something decent. But my hope is that on the flip side of that, it really, and this probably isn't going to happen because it never happens this way, but it's going to champion the writer and the story, and the things that are going to stand out are the things that are actually quality in the creative sense.
Maybe to add on to that, so this is actually something I think about quite a bit as it pertains to AI. And I kind of looked at social media to sort of set the stage for this, because in an era where more and more people are participating in social media, more and more people are sharing content, I think an unfortunate side effect is that you have to be more polarizing. And that is a huge fear of mine, because the average mom and pop shop, instead of like saying, hey, we're doing this deal, they have to like troll somebody, or like be really mean, or be overly happy, or feign a certain emotion to get attention. I don't think we have a great answer for that, because the algorithms honestly reward it, because people want like keyboard warriors that are just telling vicious stories and like coming after people. So I don't know if that's a problem that's unique to AI. I think it may exacerbate it in the short term, but long term, I hope that it creates so much clutter that people are like, all right, I'm done with that platform.
There's a few more questions. Yes, Blue.
You mentioned that you would prefer to watch a movie made by a person, but this knowledge will affect changes something quick. Assuming a current ChatGPT probably is not capable of generating really good scenario, but like also projecting forward, it could be a year or 2 or even a couple of months already to be able. And yeah, if you can comment a bit more on that, and also the whole notion of parasocial relationships with AI. This is kind of this whole rising trend with AI growth science, with AI like replacing interaction with real people, AI influencers, experiments, and that and so on. What are your thoughts on that?
I gotta be a better boyfriend, I guess, because AI is basically.
Yeah, it's coming for your girlfriend. I want to talk about the parasocial thing. I think Alexandra talked about that the other day. But yeah, I mean, I'm sorry. Can you repeat the first part of that question? I feel like
So the first part was like, just if you could elaborate on your comment that it was important for you to watch a movie knowing that it was created by a person.
Right. Yeah, I mean, when I go to the movies, what I'm looking for is something that makes me feel, whether that's sad, happy, scared, whatever it is, and I also an expression of someone's humanity and their flaws and the complexities that make up who they are. And while I'm sure an AI can get close to some of that, an AI doesn't have life experiences, it doesn't have parents or relationships or any of these things, so I just don't really know what it's going to be expressing, or except for maybe it's going to have some angst about being an AI, but I don't really care about that, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add on to that. I think like AI content, like, think about like machines that have replaced other things. Take food, for example. McDonald's, wonderful, we love it. Like 4 different shapes of McNuggets, that's great, but you're always gonna wanna like get a real meal terms of parasocial relationships, I actually wrote a really fascinating article, at least I thought so, about Karen AI, who was one of the first AI girlfriends. So basically it was an influencer who was famous on Snapchat, Instagram, etc. She had a very rabid male following and decided to turn herself into an AI with a company called Forever Voices. And the uptick was insane, where I forget the numbers, but it was like she was making, within the first month or so, it was, again, you could read my article, but I think it was somewhere near $1 million on this. And I was very concerned about it because I was like, a lot of these are young boys who are, instead of being awkward in middle school and going and trying to talk to girls, they'd be like, oh, I can just talk to Karen on the internet and she'll be my girlfriend. How wonderful. And I was like, that's concerning, because how are these boys going to grow up and form normal relationships with women? Male and female relationships are already pretty fractured. But their retort to that was that they're learning and this is like a safe space to experiment, and they can bring that out into the real world. So I don't know where that's gonna land, but I mean, Meta just announced that every influencer can become an AI if they want to, which is pretty interesting. I think we'll see how the uptake is on that announcement. I think for some people it'll be great, for some it'll be bad. Yes. Why bad? Again, I'm going to reference my own work. So I wrote about how I got access to the Charli D'Amelio, Tom Brady, Mr. Beast AIs, and I asked them about their businesses. So I asked Charli D'Amelio, I was like, or her AI, Coco, I asked her, what's your favorite pair of Social Tourist pants, which is her brand that she co-founded with Hollister, and her response was, I don't really like Social Tourist, I prefer Lululemon, which is right, so it's like, okay, for a creator who's working so hard to promote their brand, Social Tourist, if your AI is saying that you like Lululemon, it sort of defeats the purpose. The company's response to that was, this is, it's not Charli, you're not talking to Charli D'Amelio, you're talking to Coco. So, it's like, if you're talking to Margot Robbie playing Barbie, she's gonna be saying different things than Margot Robbie, basically considered an actor. But I think for a lot of people, it'd be hard to separate the two.
My initial thought there is that, and I've seen this in my own work as a publicist, AI can enable us to do more of what we love. And in this circumstance, before you gave me the harsh reality of how nascent the technology is, long term, creators are human beings that are giving up their personal lives and their privacy to be able to do the work they do. And if they could have an AI version of themselves, then they could increase their capacities, probably increase their revenue, and then as well have their own lives separate from their jobs as creators.
Totally.
So
yeah, and I think there's a lot of creators who get DM'd where are your pants from? I want to wear them, and they have to respond to that, hundreds of, maybe thousands of times with even AI that's just telling you they're Levi's, right? Any other questions? A lot. Okay, maybe we'll try and do Nicole, what's our time?
We've got 6 minutes left.
6 minutes left. Okay, let's do one more audience question in the gray.
Okay. As someone who's working with manipulated media, I was really curious, be it at Charlie or when you're working with building or writing scripts, how do you deal with AI hallucinations, or I know there's a long way to go to stop or curb AI to actually hallucinate and get original data that's not harmful in any way, but I'm curious as to what are the measures you take currently, or what are some steps that you foresee in the future to mitigate or manage AI hallucinations when generating content for either of you, or
So hallucinations is really a byproduct of two things. One is the inherent nature of large language models. They are statistical machines, and so they don't actually know what they're saying. They're just really good at predicting the next word based on all the information that they've seen. So rightfully, manipulated media makes a whole host of problems. So the first thing is hallucinations. The models just don't know what they're talking about. So that's a hard problem to solve. And that will never be solved. You can kind of get close to it with the current LLM architecture. You can never completely solve hallucination. If you want to test if someone knows AI, ask them that question, because they won't have a good answer. But the second one is the training data cutoff. This is a really hard problem to solve because it's super expensive to continuously train your models. So the best way to do it, or at least the best way that we found, is what I was describing earlier, where it goes out to the web, cross-verifies with its own knowledge base, comes back with the response, but ultimately there's still very much a human in the loop to ultimately evaluate that data. I think one of the tricky parts with AI is words mean more. So like you said the word harmful. Harmful means something different to different people. There's some universal agreements of what might be harmful, but that's a very tricky word. You have to have the right team that spends the time thinking about what that means on a holistic scale to really get back to unmanipulated media. But then one other thing is I think AI is actually helping fight that because AI can actually evaluate and analyze these types of things to see if there is inherent bias in some of these data sets. So that kind of AI solving the problem that it creates, but it's about where we're at with it.
No, that was good.
Okay, so we're just about out of time here. So I want to close with you guys predicting the future. Say we do this panel at the same time next year. What do you think we're going to be talking about?
Bradley Cooper GPT.
One can only hope.
I think a lot more people in Hollywood will start coming around to using AI. I'm hopeful that, maybe the writers won't just yet, but other parts of the process, other people, other craftspeople are going to start using it. I just saw a report from Bain from a couple of weeks ago that said that if Hollywood productions used the AI tools we have right now, they could cut down on their budgets by 20%, and that's obviously just going to, increase over time. So hoping that over time, as we adopt these things more movies will get made. Maybe, not going to get my hopes up, but there might be maybe a mini movie renaissance, and maybe there can be more things made, more interesting things made down the line.
I'll add some hopeful predictions. One, I think some great implementation efforts that have been had on large scale on the education front. I think integrating AI into the lesson plans and having AI as an educator would be one thing I hope we talk about. A second one is a way to save the magazines using AI. I haven't quite figured out how to do this yet, but it feels like there's a time capsule opportunity to make all of the archives of these legendary production companies come to life in new ways with AI. So I'm really hoping that that's a conversation we're having a year from now. And then I think a third one is, maybe this is just because I played too much Pokemon growing up, but that everybody has their own AI, that has their own technology that's enabling them and acting as an extension of them, rather than a whole bunch of startups that were successful at making an enterprise maybe 5% better at what they do.
Okay, so on everyone having an AI and saving magazines, I think we're gonna have some refreshments and perhaps some food over on that side of the curtain. And thank you guys for coming. This was a great panel.
Thank you.